Welcome to Prime Sports Media. My name is Andrew Hernandez, and today we'll be breaking down the IHSA Class 3A Dixon Regional. And tonight, the regional kicks off tonight with semifinal actions, both kicking off at 6 o'clock and 7:30. They'll be happening at Lancaster Gymnasium on the campus of Dixon High School, the regional that we'll be at tonight. The first game at 6 o'clock will be Dixon and Rockford East. And then at 7:30, we'll feature Geneva and Kaneland, part of the regional semifinal. So the winner of those games will compete Thursday night for the regional championship in Dixon. If you want to get more on the brackets, go to the IHSA website. For anyone that's willing to know where your local school is competing tonight. So more about that. So we're going to go through the bracket before we get started in Class 3A. So the Dixon Regional we go to. So the regional will be played under the Crystal Lake Central Sectional. So the winner of both games tonight will play Thursday night at 6 o'clock in Dixon. And the winner of that regional will advance to the Crystal Lake Central Sectional and will face the winner of the Belvedere North Regional. That's also going to be tipping off on Thursday at 7 o'clock. And the winner of that game will play Tuesday at 7:30. And then we'll play Thursday night at 6 o'clock in Crystal Lake for the sectional championship. So the sectional championship winner, as we go to the top of the bracket, we'll go to the Woodstock North Super Sectional, which is going to be in a couple weeks in Woodstock North at 7 o'clock. So for a chance to go to state. And we'll play the winner of the Kankakee Super Sectional also Friday, March 6th at Normal at ISU at Illinois State University. So the brackets were uploaded a couple of weeks ago. So we're going to go underway with the games. First up, we go to our first game will be Dixon coming in with a record of 28-3. They're the number one seed in the subsectional, taking on Rockford East with a record of 6-21. So most people would say, even though Dixon has the advantage because, they have a higher record with the 28-3, record. So for Dixon, they finished second in the Big Northern Conference, and they won the Oregon tip-off at the beginning of the year. But then went on a winning streak that lasted all the way until December 15th, where they lost to Morton down at Morton. That was their first loss, and they only have 3 losses, and their only 2 losses came to a Big Northern Conference member, Byron. So they lost to Byron the first time in December at the Dixon Christmas Tournament, and then lost to them in a conference game in overtime on January 24th. So basically, when we look at the conference, we kind of talked about it 4 days ago on the channel, which I think the Big Northern Conference is going to have, so most of the schools are going to go on a run this postseason. So we go to, Rockford East. So we're going to take a look at their record. For Rockford East, so for the E-Rabs, they come in with a 6-21 record and a free wins and 16 losses in the Nick 10 this year. So basically, it's kind of been, So sometimes when we look at those records, sometimes we can say, oh, they probably had, a young team. Maybe, the team was pretty young, this season. But any of that too, that's one other thing I would say as well. When I look at these records, when I look at with 6 wins and that many losses, sometimes I may say, oh yeah, they may have had they may have a young team. But moving on, so this game, for Dixon, when some people may look at it, may say, oh, Dixon, they're going to have an advantage. They're going to, steamroll through this team, even though with the number one seed. Because even though, what I can say, with Dixon, they're going to have the home court advantage in this regional, but with the number one seed, they can also have a target on their back, even when you're number one ranked in the subsectional. But in this game, I'm probably gonna go with the Duchesses because they're probably gonna steamroll through Rockford East. So Rockford East, this is I think their first year in 3A. They normally out of the E-Rabs, they're normally in 4A because a lot of the Nick 10 schools are kind of in 4A. When we look at them normally, like the only schools I know that are in 4A are East, Honega, Guilford, Harlem, Rockford Auburn, Rockford Jefferson. Those are mainly the schools that are traditionally a 4A school. When we talked about the ranks of volleyball, basketball, and then you had Belvedere, Boylan, and Freeport, Belvedere North, which are the 3A schools, and which are the only 3A schools kind of in the Nick 10. So next game we have is Geneva versus Maple Park Kaneland. So these two will be playing at 7:30. The following game after the Dixon Rockford East game. So Geneva, they come in with the record of 14-14. So even wins, even losses, and then they went fourth in the Duquesne Conference with the 8 wins and 6 losses this year in Duquesne. So whenever we look at the schedules, both of these schedules, when they have 19-12 and 14-14, it kind of shows that they may have had a tough season, a tough schedule. So when we look at some of their losses, they've had some, I think, that were really close. At the beginning of the year, they had Hampshire back in November 21st, and then Lake Urch at the beginning of the season, which were close games they had. So next up is we look at down the stretch, they've played probably some good opponents. Even though with the Duquesne Conference having some, it's a really tough conference. When I look at the Duquesne, basketball wise, I'm familiar with the football wise. I know a lot of people are familiar with it's Geneva. They're in the conference with Batavia. Batavia, that's in the conference. I know a lot of people are familiar with them. Out of the western suburbs, St. Charles East, St. Charles North, Wheaton North, Wheaton, Warrensville South, and Glennsboro North. So next up, we have Kaneland, the Lady Knights. They're coming in with 19-12 record. They were second in the Interstate 8 Conference, 6-4. So both of these schools kind of not far from each other. Both are kind of out there out in the western suburbs of Chicago. Kaneland, which is not far from Aurora, and then Geneva, which is up there by Aurora as well. So going to the records, so they did meet Dixon, that's in the regional. They met them back in December 10th as well. So basically, 19-12 record, and basically had an up and down season, but also going into the regional. So next up, both Dixon and Kaneland coming into us are looking for their third straight regional title in 3 years, looking for a repeat. So Dixon, they won the last 3. They won in 2024. They won the Rochelle regional, and then last year won the regional in Freeport. And then Kaneland, I don't know what regionals they were part of last year, but I know they won 3 straight regionals. But But them two in the postseason have met the last 2 years. Dixon won both of those contests. So Dixon is currently on a 5-game winning streak against Kaneland. So basically the data shows since 2023. So Dixon won back on November 27, 2023. That was, I think, one of our girls' games. We were there at that game between Kaneland and Dixon. They won 55-27. Also that year, they did play in the sectional championship in Sycamore, which Dixon won 45-36. And then last year, they played in Maple Park, 47-38. Dixon won, and then Dixon won by 10 last year in part of the Rockford sectional semifinal in Rockford at Boylan. So if they play each other, then that means they'll be the 3rd year that they played in the postseason, but this time in regional play, in regional championship. So, the winner, if I would say, would go to the Crystal Lake Central sectional. So there's a lot of good teams I would love to see make it. When I look at this sectional, Crystal Lake South, the number 1 seed on the other side of the sectional. Sycamore and Freeport, both really good. Both have really good girls basketball programs. Sycamore, the defending conference champions this year in Interstate 8. Freeport, another really talented team in the Nick 10, too. And then so speaking of that sectional, we're talking about Dixon Regional. So the picks tonight, I'm going to go with Dixon winning against Rockford East, and then Kaneland over Geneva. So I think these two are probably going to play each other in the regional championship. But I think I'm going to go with Dixon because they're going to make it, 3rd time a charm, going into a regional championship game. But these two, it's kind of like a rivalry. It's kind of like a rivalry they have, even though basically what it looks like, basically like a rivalry they have, when we look at it, because they played the last 3 years in the postseason where Dixon, for Kaneland, if they do want to win the regional, it means that we gotta get the best of these guys because we played this team the last 2 years in the postseason. They knocked us out, so I'm excited to see what's going to happen and what's also going to happen Thursday night. For anyone in the comments out there, put who you think's going to win. You have Dixon, Rockford East. You have Kaneland, Geneva. Put it out there. And also, for some of you guys that are going out tonight in Dixon, Lancaster Gym at the regional semifinal games, first game, Dixon, Rockford East is at 6 o'clock. And then Kaneland and Geneva will play at 7:30 at Lancaster Gym in Dixon. Kind of lost what I said, but also we'll see you out there tonight. And also, everyone have a great Monday and have a great week as well. For anyone that's going to miss out on some of the stuff that we might post as well, or if it's the only time you watch, have a great week, and we'll see you in the next video.